Коллеги, добрый день.
Hello, colleagues. Hello. I would like to continue saying thanks for you for staying until almost 8 p.m. and you're listening to our presentations. Okay, today we're going to speak about automation of the compliance assessment management. So it's going to be getting away from hardening to the subcontractors, through subcontractors in the direction of PERSEC, compliance assessment. As a rule, when we hear compliance assessment, we have a smaller association with the architecture of IS and IT. And today we're going to look at how they are interrelated to each other as IS infrastructure helps to simplify this process. My name is Podolny Alexander. I'm the head of the technical pre-sale of the Security Vision. Security Vision is involved in development of products for automation of information security processes in IT. In more than 5 years, I'm involved in projects on automation of different processes. And I would like to get focused on the experience of automation of the compliance assessment in application to the demands of the colleagues, organizations, which came to the necessity of automation of this process. And a small spoiler, most of these projects, well, the introduction, please help us to find the truthfulness of information that we get during the public polls. How can we do it with the IS infrastructure? That's what we're going to speak about right now. And in the beginning, let's describe what is a classical assessment of the compliance, what are the basic ways of automation thereof. Compliance management, relatively speaking, can be divided into 4 main stages. Stage 1, forming of the assessment itself, when we understand what is being assessed, what information system, business process, group of assets, or even the employees. Sometimes we have assessments like that. Then we have public poll management, collecting answers, then entity for the compliance assessment, when we collect single document, calculate the assessment for the regulatory document, and the decision is being made about non-compliance. Then we have an objective for the executives, we define deadlines, SLMs for their execution, and then we're looking at the controlling which measures have to be implemented, because it's a cyclic process. It is launched over and over again on the agreement for these audits that's being conducted, or when part of some complex objectives is being conducted, we should reassess which level of assessment of this document is available in the organization. So let's review the best practices, understandable way of automation the processes which actively are applied in the organization today. On the stage of the area of assessment defining, we should work on the actual source model of assets, CMDB or catalog, where they light up the information about technical means, program, software, owners, information systems, business processes, suppliers, etc., etc., etc. Depending on the complexity of the processes in the organization, they can have a big number of different entities, but what is important is interrelations between them in order to understand through which service and through which software it is possible to influence on the target information system. Therefore, having such a catalog, you can determine what is being assessed and for which assets. To form these public polls, you need to have a registry of documents, not subscription to Consultant Plus, but some internal portal or some Excel file well documented. The documents have to be decomposed for the technical requirements, so you could quickly put it into the questionnaire and sent to the experts. On the stage of objectives management, the best practice is the integrations. We're speaking about the scenarios of integration with the mail, service desk for objective integration, but there's a second stage that we are facing during projects. It's when the company fulfills internal portal to conduct different audits. And this portal can be the integration when it sends the public polls, replies and objectives, and I would like to say and/or to integration or to internal portal. However, the compliance assessment stage, to my point of view, is the more labor-intensive and difficult from the point of view of this process. And what are the best practices here? First of all, if the company was able to build the registry of implemented protection measures and map them to specific documentary requirements to which assessment has been conducted, then if you use even Excel, some of the requirements can easily be calculated by putting specific check marks. But what is to be done with other requirements, technical requirements, configuration of assets? And in here, I would like to propose to start answering the question how to provide the truthfulness of the information received. Of course, what if you don't do the public polls? If you will collect information directly from the systems? Well, the best practice is from the technical configuration ones, usage of respective compliance scanners which scan infrastructure on specific write-offs, and they show compliance to the configuration of assets to the requirements of different regulatory documents. However, by tuning integration with such scanner, we cover some other requirements which cover automatically without doing the public polls. And there's a sense to continue this idea and think what else can help us from the point of view of receiving information directly from the system, getting around these public polls. And here we can be helped by typical infrastructural systems and by other information which are used in a typical infrastructure of informational infrastructure of organization. So if you will push this idea a little bit later, you can look at risk-oriented approach, because through integration they look at the dynamics of key parameters changes, and if some changes are happening outside of specific KPIs, then you can apply fast compensating methods. Let's make some examples from the point of view of typical architecture of IT of the organization and informational security, which is interesting to us. IT infrastructure helps us, first of all, to fill the model of assets. If the company has ERP, don't mix with IRP, enterprise resource planning. This is organizational structure, owners of assets, information system, business processes, and other entities. If you have CMDB, then in principle it's the source number one for integration. Then CMDB very often is conducted while the licenses and information about the country, manufacturer of this software. So through this integration you can calculate the import substitution percentage. And this is checking the requirements of the Decree 250 by the President. What else is interesting to this architecture? Virtualization management system to understand where assets are located, which are being assessed. Do they have backups, snapshots? And then it's interesting to see integration with the catalog service, system of monitoring to understand the status of assets that are being assessed, for example, which belong to this informational system. Infrastructural scanners, adding the assets to new infrastructure, and process of agreement is being built through them. There was a separate case when in the framework of these client has asked follow-up of the status of political regulations to the audit and e-document flow. Of course, from the point of view of follow-up of the compliance assessment, it is very important, and we do need typical solutions which are related to the information security architecture. Let's make several examples. Incidental statistics, verdicts, possibly status of sending towards the regulator, etc., and other auxiliary information. Then it's the coverage of infrastructure with antiviral agents, integration of antiviral management, vulnerability scanner, protection scanner. Also, what else was mentioned? CPT type of management, showing the threat on the perimeter, or integration with the security awareness for the TSTO attacks and other practices. And another key thing critical information, PDN, ESPN, integration with GLP, storage places for this information, data governance. And we shouldn't look at these list of examples that I've shown you. New integration coming from those regulatory documents on the basis of which audits are happening, on the basis of typical solutions which are present in the architecture. So we continuously add new and new examples on the basis of the needs of the clients. But we have to understand that this integrational approach and automation has its own limitations. It cannot be a rescue for the process of the compliance assessment because, unfortunately, the problem is related to the normative documents. And according to the decree 21, we have conducted audits and we have faced this situation that is very difficult to interpret what is needed. I'm not speaking about decrees of the president and other normative documents. That's why this is about interpretation, but when you pass this pathway 2-3 times, you can automate a lot of things, and there are projects which cannot be acquired anywhere else. Just manually, you can introduce certain answers, but the way that we have discovered, following on the basis of the previous audits, so that you don't write this information for conducting another iteration, and then somehow you can get out of the situation. But there is no way that you will be able to solve the objective when your top management asks you to recheck the report that has been formed for some regulator, because there could be sanctions. So you're sitting and checking it. There are certain specifics how it is done in holdings, and all these examples that I was making today, they are applicable. However, there is a certain specifics, and this specifics is related with politics. In other words, independent companies, they have to be interested in transferring information to the head organization, and it's not always possible. So we need some leverage, and the networking integration should be built. But there is a positive moment. Holdings very often define their own documents, internal ones. They don't have general formulations, and they are delivered in a simpler way for automatic checkups. And in DZO, the number of typical solutions, much less than in main organizations, so typical integrations are antiviral, software management to cover with antiviruses, domain controller, CMDB, and CMSOR, which is located usually in the head. So by integrating with it, we're setting up certain filters. But nevertheless, some of those checkups can be covered. Okay, let's draw a line and come back to the life cycle of the compliance assessment. It is very important to have a final asset registry of standards decomposed by requirements. At the stage of public pool and objectives management, we either integrate with existing mail service desk or realize internal portal where the audits are conducted. And for the compliance assessment, it is very important to have availability of the important registry of implemented measures of protection related with documents to quickly automate and calculate these requirements. And it helps to use integrational approach, which gives us a possibility not to check some of the requirements with the help of these public polls, but to read them directly from the system. Once again, please think about what requirements are given to you, what systems are available in your architecture, and don't limit yourself with these examples. But please remember that at a given moment of time, full automation is impossible, but it's due to the fact that you have such formulations of the regulatory documents. Thank you very much.